This episode of the Beyond the Physics podcast is brought to you by you. So if you'd like to support the podcast, please check out patreon.com/Beyond the Physics. Okay, everyone, just a quick introduction for you all. Today we have an update episode meant to catch you up on what we've been up to the past 7 months or so, why we haven't been recording. We hope to change that and have regular episodes come out to you at least for the next few months. But in the update, we cover like what classes we've been taking, what milestones we've accomplished, but we also take an in-depth look into my imposter syndrome, as the title suggests. So this episode might be a little emotionally fraught, just as an FYI, but could be cathartic if that's the type of thing you're into. One last thing is we have a new introduction song because one of our fans has been so gracious to make us a song. And so we don't put the whole song in the intro. So if you want to check out the whole thing, stick around to the end and we'd love to share that with y'all. So if there's anyone else that wants to send us music our way, send us an email through the episode notes. And without further ado, let's get into tonight's episode. This is Beyond the Physics. All right. Hi, everyone, and welcome to Beyond the Physics. This is Joseph Guzman, and I'm joined with
Irene Roman.
And today we're giving you an update podcast to let you know what we've been up to the past 7 months or so. And we think you guys deserve to know what's been going on in our lives, and we hope to be making content and releasing that to you shortly. So let's just do a quick recap, and then we'll be going into a lot of the details of what's been going on in our lives. But yeah, so Irene, you want to start? What classes did you end up taking the past 7 months or so?
Yeah, okay. Well, I didn't have to take too many classes this past, like, I guess the fall 2020 and spring 2021. But I think that what I did do was pretty essential in terms of building my confidence and making me feel a little bit more comfortable with the whole graduate school experience. And just in general, when I grow into being a researcher, if I do one day. So the fall of 2020, I basically just took a class that was a new class in the high energy department, and it was kind of like a journal club type of class where we'd pick a topic or a few papers on a topic, and then we spent the semester basically writing up an hour-long presentation about the topic. And so I chose a topic that has a lot of details to it, and I barely scratched the surface of the material. But it was on modern techniques in calculating scattering amplitudes, so like higher loop amplitudes, and even tree amplitudes as well. And so...
can I ask you any questions about that at the moment? Or do you not feel comfortable with that?
I mean, what do you mean?
I'm not sure exactly what that even means, like calculating the amplitudes of modern techniques of calculating amplitudes.
Oh, okay. Well, I mean, so if you're in a quantum field theory class, usually you use this, like the Feynman prescription to calculate scattering amplitudes of like processes that might happen. So like either it's like electron scattering, proton scattering, annihilation, stuff like that. And so there's some probability amplitude for the specific process to occur, and we have to find ways to calculate these amplitudes. And so in the class, if you take a standard QFT class, the way they do it is like a Feynman prescription. But you see that as you add loops into your diagram, you start seeing that the number of Feynman diagrams that you have to put in your calculation explode like hundreds of thousands, millions of diagrams. And so it's not going to work if you're trying to do a calculation where you have to calculate a million elements. Although there's symmetries that a lot of them will cross out. But still, it's a hindrance to do that. So you have to come up with new novel ways of organizing things mathematically and looking at it through a different mathematical lens, so that you can do these calculations more easily. And one of the big ones nowadays is, unitarity method. Sorry, I'm blanking for a second. But so it's like a generalized unitarity. I'm not going to go into the detail of the podcast this time, but maybe in the future I can talk about it. But yeah, so it's something that's really great, and it's part of what I'm doing for my research too. It's applicable. But, I've always had a lot of anxiety and not much confidence in terms of this difficult material. And so it was kind of like a breakthrough for me to be able to actually present an hour presentation on these methods, which, as like I said, I feel like I barely scratched the surface. But I did learn a lot that also helps me in terms of my research understanding. And so that was definitely a big win for me. And I think it really helped me gain a lot of confidence. And then going into my spring semester, this semester that just ended, so everyone knows we just ended this past week, and I actually had to take a course that for some reason I ended up skipping it at first. It's one of the core courses that we have to take the first year that we come here, and I just skipped it somehow. And I had to take it, and it was actually, I really saw how much confidence and my skills have grown over the years, because I felt really good in that class. I felt like, I knew what was going on. I even knew further because of the stuff I'd studied in QFT and for my research. And so it was a confidence builder, I would say, So it was nice to know that, I have actually been learning something, and that's definitely helped me gain in confidence for sure. So the last 2 semesters have been, I think, overall helped me really push me along emotionally, right? And I mean, I had to work through mental blocks throughout, of course. So, it's not always up in terms of your confidence. It's not always like, 100%. You're always getting better and better, up and up. Some days, you feel less confident than other days. I think it's natural. But overall, I think that I was able to succeed in ways that I previously probably really wasn't sure I would be able to. So just looking back and reflecting, I'm proud of myself. And the fact that I can say I'm proud of myself is also a positive for me. Yeah, so I mean, I finished off strong this semester, and I'm feeling pretty good. The only thing is I feel like I'm a little bit slow in research. It's probably because I am a little bit of a perfectionist, and I feel like I have to understand every topic to the depth, to a specific depth, before I can even apply it. And I think I'm starting to realize that I need to kind of push that aside and kind of do work as I'm learning, instead of saying I have to learn everything and know everything before I can actually do the research. So I'm kind of trying to work through those things with research. So I think that, it's coming along. So I'm hopeful that it's just going to be a moment where I have another breakthrough in research, and then I'm just going to kind of start pumping stuff out. I'm hoping. We'll see. But what about you, Joe? How has your last 2 semesters been?
Yeah, that's great. Thanks for sharing that. And I guess I will just tag on there that, I'm proud of you as well. So
thank you. I'm proud of you too.
Thank you. But so in the fall of 2020, I took Quantum Field Theory A, and that was an intense course. I had some guidance from you, and that was very helpful, of course. But yeah, I ended up doing well. I got an A-, and I think the fact that quantum field theory is like a required course for like every physics major here is, I think, a little novel for our program. But I'm grateful for having taken it. I think it's cool learning more details about high energy physics. And along that vein, in the spring, the semester that we just finished, as you mentioned, I took High Energy Physics 1 as well as Extragalactic Astronomy. And so I think those classes went well. Again, it might be my first 4.0 semester
Yay!
in my graduate school career. The grades aren't in yet, right? Because we just finished, and that's why we're recording the podcast today. But I think I got an A in both my classes, and so that's a first for grad school, and that's great.
Yeah, congratulations. That's so awesome.
Yeah, thank you. But so there's a lot to say. There's a lot to unpack in terms of like my trajectory throughout the past 7 months. And I think we were going to try to unpack that today. So I'm going to do the best I can. I mean, it's something that's difficult to talk about. I'm really going to be laying myself out there and being pretty vulnerable with you and everyone listening. But I think that's something that is important to do. I think it's something that's worthwhile. And I think, I think it's something that I would like this podcast to be a place where it's safe to talk about these types of things. And so we could try to help normalize, discussing what's going on in our internal worlds with everyone. That's something that's, I think, really just lacking in physics in general in the community. But yeah, so I guess let's get started, right? So the picture I just painted of like what's been going on in this past 7 months, like externally, things probably look great, right? Like I took QFTA, I took high energy physics and extragalactic astronomy, all these like rather difficult classes that, someone just coming into physics has a long journey before they get anywhere like that, right? Mm-hmm. And I did well in all of them, right?
Yeah, you did really well.
So I'm proud of myself for that. I think it's great that I was able to accomplish those things. But at the same time, what was going on for me during the process of all this was very much the opposite. It was very much like a struggle day to day. There was a lot going on and it was very difficult and it was not pretty. So like, for instance, this journey, I guess if we were to go chronologically, like, in QFTA, I started to notice some like a pattern of thought that was like kind of like a bad habit where we would get assigned like a homework or something, and the homeworks are really difficult. I would look at the homework, it would look like Chinese to me. I would have no idea what it's saying, and I would be immediately discouraged, right? I would feel terrible for a couple days. I would feel like this looks impossible. I would feel like, why am I so stupid? Why do I have no idea what's going on? Like, I just don't understand what's going on in the class, so on and so forth. But I would push through. I mean, I got an A in the class, right? So eventually I would have to figure it out, and I did, and the homeworks would go well at the end of the day, right? I'm just mentioning that this is like the pattern that I found myself stepping into in QFT. And it became really apparent when we got the final exam, right? So the final was just way too much work. I had that same pattern of thought, right? And it just, like, I had no idea what it was saying. I was very intimidated and overwhelmed. But then once I did figure out like what it is I need to do, I was like, I don't even have enough time. Like, it was a take-home exam, and I had like a week. And even knowing that I had a week or whatever, it was like, I don't have enough time to sit here and calculate by hand what I need to show. And so I got a lot of corners. It worked out in the end, but I felt really terrible during that time. I felt so bad, emotionally, mentally, and it was like a red flag went off in my head. I'm like, whoa, this is getting bad, and I guess this is something that I might have to address at some point. So that was like the first sign. And then in the spring, I learned that I had to retake a course. There's been updates to this. It's really complicated, but it's relevant for, how I was feeling. So I guess I could outline those details now because I suppose it's relevant. Excuse me. So the graduate school has requirements for GPA, right? So they have a requirement where you need to have above a 3.0 minimum GPA. I satisfy that with like a 3.4 or something. But what I learned in the spring was that they also have a requirement for the 6 core classes. Like you mentioned, you had to retake. You didn't have to retake. You took one of the core classes recently during that semester, which was statistical mechanics, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and then there's, theoretical dynamics, electricity and magnetism, quantum mechanics, right? These are considered the fundamentals of physics that for some reason in graduate school physicists are expected to know everything about these fundamentals, right? Yeah. You're expected to know the whole body of work of like what's been going on the past few hundred years. So anyways, I did not meet that requirement for the 3.0 GPA for the core classes specifically. I have like a 2.92 because in electricity and magnetism I got a C, right? There's an A and a B series, and I got a C in both of them. And there's a lot to unpack there as well, but I'll avoid the temptation of going down that rabbit hole. But so yeah, I talked to my research advisor, and he made it seem like that I had to retake E&M like as soon as possible, which would be the fall of this year, 2021. And that gave me a lot of anxiety. Perhaps that's a tame word. That's putting it lightly. Like that instilled within me like a sense of dread, right? The fact that, I have to go back and take this class. I've heard not so great things about, what was going on in that class for the new cohort of graduate students. And I was really doubting my skills and I did not feel confident that I can like go back into this class and succeed. And it's kind of like an all or nothing where like if I don't do better, then technically they're totally within their right of like kicking me out of graduate school. And that's why it was causing me so much anxiety. It's because it was a very high pressure situation that I found myself in. And it was just this requirement that I didn't even know existed that just kind of came out of the blue. And it's just like, okay, you have to deal with this now. Here's this hoop. You better jump through it. Otherwise, well, fuck you. So
the hoop disappears like a centimeter away, and you're like, you have to jump through it right now. Go.
Yeah, exactly. So because I was so worried about this class, it was making me feel really bad during the spring semester. Like, again, I found myself in this pattern of thought where I would just feel like, I guess the hot phrase is I felt feelings of imposter syndrome. I felt like I didn't belong in the program. I didn't deserve to be here. I felt like stupid, unworthy. And it was really distracting for my work. It made it just so like I had this extra potential barrier that I had to overcome to even get started on figuring out what's going on with these homeworks and how to progress in my program. And so at this point, it became apparent to me that like I need to figure my shit out, the shit that's going on internally before the fall, because I think it's going to be the psychological barriers that are going to hold me back from succeeding in retaking this course more so than anything else. So I started going to therapy. I started going to the school's free counseling services.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. Do you want to corroborate anything up to this point? Like, what is your perspective of like what was going on for me at the time?
Well, I mean, I was just gonna ask you a little bit about, I guess, I mean, more about in the spring semester, like
Mm-hmm.
what kind of feelings were you having? Like, how often were you feeling like emotionally blocked or mentally blocked in terms of being able to do work? Like, how did that compare to the spring semester or the fall semester when you had QFT? You said you already started feeling these things.
Mm-hmm.
And like, what was the severity of it, like from that semester to now, the spring? And what happened in between? You know, there's a little bit of a break, maybe a few weeks in between. How are you feeling in those few weeks? Was it just building that anxiety, like those negative feelings? Are they building or?
Well, so tackling the second question first. No, when I found I was on break, I felt totally fine. I felt like, I mean, the winter break is really short. Like they only give us like a couple weeks, to for Christmas and stuff. So there's really not that much to talk about there. But I noticed when I'm not in the academic setting, I feel totally content and confident with myself otherwise. But in terms of the severity of the feelings, the severity is probably similar. However, since I was taking 2 classes rather than 1, they came up more frequently, right? I found the frequency of those feelings, it's very predictable, follows the frequency of the assignments.
Yeah. Okay.
Right? So it's like I get a homework, the feelings will follow not long after, you know? And so QFT had, and QFT in itself had less assignments than I think the other classes, either of them,
Yeah.
right? It was more spread out. They were bigger, but, you had more time to do them.
Yeah.
Whereas this semester I had 2 classes, and then there was many more, assignments. So.
Okay. And so what is that feeling again that you had, like when it came on? Like, what does it feel like?
Shit. No, it feels like
Like, what's the progression, like how does it start and then how does it feel? How long does it last? When does
Okay.
it go away? If it does.
Yeah, that's a good question. So if I'm sitting here I'm just trying to recollect then, like, the feelings, as I've never, like, verbalized it, but, like, say I get a notification, like, oh, this new homework's up or something. Then I feel, like, anxious. I feel anxiety building up. I feel, like, tense in my body. And then I'm like, okay, I gotta go check out this homework. I gotta go get started because, need to figure out how bad the damage is. And, like, once I look at the homework, I can get a sense of, like, how much time it's going to take me to, like, figure out what's going on here. So, like, so I could plan out my week effectively, I guess. So then I get the homework assignment, and then normally I have this habit of just, like, writing out all the questions, because I write out the questions and then I do my solution below that for my homeworks. So I write out the questions. I'm not paying too close attention to writing it out. So I'm not really putting that much pressure on myself to understand everything. I'm just hoping that, like, if I can, like, not really pay attention and know what's going on, then I'm probably in a good spot. But so if I write those questions down and then at some point, I go to, like, really take a second to sit down and try to understand what is it asking me. And if I don't get a good sense of, like, what the question is even asking me to do, then the feelings of, like, dread come in, of the feelings of, like, oh shit, here we go again. Like, this is gonna be tough. Like, and then also during last semester, I struggled a lot with motivation. at some point I felt like kind of defeated by the homeworks. At some point I felt like this feeling just kept coming up again and again and again. I was just like over it, I guess. I felt like done. Physics at that point didn't feel fun anymore. I was just like these problems felt like felt meaningless and not really fulfilling, and just more suffering was coming. Like trying to figure this out. Anyways, and then so when do the feelings go away? So normally I feel like that the whole day, and then a day or two later I'll probably come back and like re-examine the problems. And then at that point is when I start making progress normally. And then as I get going and actually start doing the work, maybe I get lost in the sauce a little bit or whatever, and then I forget the feelings.
Mm-hmm. So it becomes a little interesting?
Yeah.
You mean when you say lost in the sauce, you mean you get interested in it and you're like...
Yeah, maybe at least a little bit.
Okay.
You know, like I can entertain myself with like, okay, maybe this is pointless, but like this calculation or whatever, I can focus on it, you know?
Yeah. Okay. And so then it dissipates after that. Like after you get into it, you start doing it, and then maybe you realize that, oh, you are capable of doing this work. You just have to do...
Yeah, at some point. Mm-hmm. Okay. At some point down the line. And then once I finish it, if I feel really confident about what I do, and normally for me to feel comfortable to turn it in, I have to feel pretty confident about my work. Once I feel confident to turn it in, then I'm on like a peak, you know? Then I'm like feeling good.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I mean, that whole kind of, I say, emotional roller coaster, I think that happens in grad school, I think is at least part of what you're discussing, this emotional roller coaster, I think is common for people in grad school, right? Like emotionally. I know like yours is specific, and it was, I think, to a detrimental level that ends up giving you like maybe a mental block, right? And really stopped your progress. And that's, I think there's more there, right? That hopefully you'll share with us as to like why the reason is for that. Because you mentioned you had a feeling of dread, but I mean, what kind of was your head telling you about yourself? Because I feel like it wasn't just like, oh, you dread maybe you won't be able to complete the assignment. I feel like it was more than that. I feel like there was something tied to like maybe the way you perceived yourself or your identity even, which is what made it even like more detrimental. And maybe there are more people who are feeling these things, but we don't hear about it, right? Like people, it's like not normalized to talk about your emotional experience in grad school. And I think that it's a shame. It's very sad because we need to hear these stories. And I think that once people can like, you know, just talk to each other and they realize that other people are feeling these things too, I think that just builds this community where maybe we can, when we share them, we pick up, you know, new ideas from other people, and it can actually help resolve some of the issues that we have, right?
Yeah.
But so, yeah, I mean, can you talk a little bit about that, whether you think that it was, you know, tied something to more like your self-identity or like perceptions about yourself?
The short answer is definitely, and then I think I want to refrain from going into the details of that because there's this whole long story that I had planned of like how to unpack that.
Yeah, of course.
But yeah, I mean, I think definitely a lot of the sense of dread, the feelings come from just, there's also these thoughts that were swimming around my head of just like, yeah, I'm just not good enough. I'm not smart enough, not capable, you know, and I take that as evidence as like maybe I won't be able to succeed. Maybe I can't overcome what's in front of me, you know?
Yeah.
Even though it's just a homework, you know, I guess it gets built up into like, it feeds this thought of just like your overall placement in the program and where you're at.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. But so, yeah, if I continue along the story here is so I started going to therapy, right? That was an interesting experience. It was my first time getting any type of like mental health counseling. And I think overall it was a positive experience. I ended up going for a few months. Now I'm currently on a break, indefinite break, I guess. But so I'm not sure what parts to share about that whole experience. I already put a lot of work into myself, like mentally, and trying to like understand my emotions, and I really try to be self-aware of like what I'm going through at any given moment. So I picked up some techniques along the way that were pretty easy for me to adopt, I'd say. And they were pretty powerful. And then at some point I did make like a breakthrough, but yeah. Okay. So sorry about that, everyone. We had to take a quick break, and now we've returned. So let's just try to recap where we were at. I was discussing my experience with therapy, and overall, I think it was, helpful for me eventually making a breakthrough. But, I think a lot of it, I guess a lot of the things I accomplished during that time, I probably would hopefully have made regardless. But maybe I think it just probably eased the friction to be able to have like a space where I can clearly dedicate and like have this designated time to like focus on trying to figure out these things going on with my mental health. But yeah, so I'm not sure what details to talk about that therapy experience, where to start or what to include or what not to include. So do you have any questions regarding that?
Well, I think that it would be interesting to really understand the source of, first off, the source of really these feelings that you had when you're presented with these challenging problems, right? And so if you explore that in therapy, then like what exactly is this big overarching, reason that help construct these views that you have of yourself?
Yeah. So the obvious caveat is that, I'm not a therapist, I'm not a psychologist or a licensed medical professional. So I'm just giving you my interpretation of the events. Also, what was made clear in the therapy sessions were that I think it's considered like mainly CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy. So I think my personal counselor was primarily interested in providing me with the techniques that would help me make it through the program, right? It wasn't like a primary focus of the sessions to figure out the root cause of these things, but that is something that I inadvertently ended up discovering on my own, outside of those time periods. And so I explored a lot of different potential root causes of like mainly my imposter syndrome, which is what I viewed as like the primary things holding me back. So there's a lot of different hypotheses, ideas that I had of what it could be. And eventually, when I felt like I made a breakthrough, it became clear that it seemed like the primary cause was like an event that happened at the start of my graduate school career. It might sound innocuous to some, but it was traumatic for me, I guess. Should I go into those details now? Here?
Yeah. Since you're here already, why not?
Okay. Yeah, I'll try to preserve people's identities to the best of my ability. It's not. I'm not interested in like bad mouthing people, even people that have done me wrong.
Well, we can give the person a letter for the name that is not even related to their name. Like.
I might mess that up, but I mean, I could try. Yeah. What are you thinking?
Like L. I don't know. I just thought of L.
Sounds like Death Note.
Okay, we're not gonna go down that road, but
whatever. I'll try L. Sure. Okay. So basically the event, what happened is my first semester in graduate school, I came into our current university as a master's student. It's a master's to PhD program. It's meant to give students who don't necessarily might have some gaps in their training in terms of like where they're at, finishing undergrad in physics, to fill the opportunity to fill those gaps and to make a strong like PhD application or to continue on into their PhD program. So it's a diversity program. And yeah, and it's called the Bridge Program, right? We should probably do an episode sometime, like, spotlighting it and, encouraging people to apply there and stuff.
Yeah, definitely.
It's been a really great experience being part of that program.
Yeah, and a great resource. Like, just awesome. Oh, well, we can talk about it in detail in another episode for sure, because I think it's worthy of that.
Yeah. But so anyways, Irene and I both came into our current university under this program, right? So my first semester here, I was a master's student, and I was taking upper division classical mechanics. And my professor at the time, who was L, right? My professor at the time was L, right? And so at some point during the middle of the semester, you and I went out to lunch off campus. It's someplace close. It was like it was across the street from school. And we just happened to be sitting next to L and three other of L's co-professors, I guess you could call them. And so while we were eating lunch and we happened to be sitting right next to them, L was speaking loudly to the point where it could almost come across as yelling. It was hard not to hear what L was saying, basically. L said things along the lines of that the bridge students couldn't get into any other PhD programs, so they're really weak and they're the lowest, the quote, lowest of the low. And went on to say basically about how bridge students didn't deserve to be there, and so on, right? I guess I don't really need to go into any more details at that point. And the other professors at the table, didn't do much to really rebuff what was being said at that moment. And so that was, so that was really traumatic for me to hear. I wouldn't realize it at the time, but that would affect me profoundly. That semester was really hard too. My first semester there, after I heard that, I did not feel safe in the environment anymore, right? So, I guess why that's so hurtful is because it's it's a violation of trust. I no longer felt like I had a welcoming environment. I was not being accepted for who I was. It destroys the sense of a shared worldview of I tried to treat everyone with like respect and compassion, and that obviously wasn't a priority for Elle, and that's upsetting. So at the time, I felt so insecure then because really I felt like, well, so I was in Elle's class, right? I was one of two bridge students in Elle's class, so I was representing the bridge students, and I felt responsible for her perspective on the bridge students. And so I felt really insecure. I felt really bad about myself, to the point where it's like, okay, I just gotta work really hard. And like, I worked so hard that I really neglected my body. I slept like less than 5 hours a day during that semester. Yeah, my sleeping habits were so bad. I was working around the clock, and I had insomnia, and I just couldn't. Yeah, so now, like, when I look back, I think my sleeping habits were so bad that it's like that period of my life is kind of like I've almost forgotten it, right? It's kind of like my memory from then is like hazy.
Yeah.
I think because of my sleeping habits.
Can I
So
ask you a question?
yeah, please.
Did you ever have like insecurities before this time? Like, did you ever have just insecurities in general about your capabilities in physics or anything? Did you have imposter syndrome before this?
Yeah, I did. I mean, definitely I did, but it never got to the point where it's like actively deterring me from my work, right? Like those feelings were there at some specific moments I could name, right? Because as I was spitballing like hypotheses of where this feeling originated, there were definitely moments before this where I felt imposter syndrome. In undergrad, definitely. There's some really triggering experiences back then as well. But it never felt so like heavy, so like it really got in the way of me making progress right before that moment. So I don't know. I could go into those details of like, but
I guess I wondered like why the words that you heard from him like caused that, like why were those words so strong for you, to kind of like really in a way shape like all of your experience like in the graduate program in a way that your other experiences that you say those feelings of imposter syndrome you had in the past, why didn't they have such like an immense kind of reaction?
Well, so one thing is that it was so blatant, right? It was just so in your face of just like it came across as so honest, right? It's so like this is what Elle truly believes, right? And and so I mean it's hurtful. I already kind of went into some of the details as to why it's hurtful, but part of it that's scary, right, is because it's just like those are some beliefs that you might have that I had in the back of my head anyways, right? Insecurities that were latent within me that I kind of pushed to the side. But then to have someone in this position of power that had a lot of power over me validating that dark side of myself is why it was hurtful, right? It's because part of me felt like it was true. It's because part of me felt like I didn't deserve to be here, that I was a weak student, that I failed in getting into PhD programs. But the other part of me, I mean, But I don't think I don't think that's a fair perspective, right? Is the problem, right? Is like the whole point of the program is to like shore up any weaknesses that you have, right? So if you're going to take on the responsibility of accepting those students, then you need to take the part of that responsibility includes like trying to, you know, lift these people up and trying to figure out, you know, what their gaps are, rather than saying like, oh, you have these gaps, so you're insufficient as a physicist, right? You're deficient, and you know you will always be deficient.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think that's a really good like answer for that. I mean, it just becomes more real, you know, like you said, when there's this person in power saying these things that you are worried are true about you, you know. And then you hear someone in power kind of confirm that, and it has a lot of power, I guess, right? I mean, they have a lot of power, and they have a lot of power over you. And so if you're like, oh, if they can believe that, then, you know, you start thinking there are other people that also believe that, and they're like, oh, then, you know, that's the framework they follow, and it actually exists in the real world. So that means that, like, maybe I am not good enough, right? Mm-hmm. You know, if people follow that framework and they believe that about me, and they're people that are like established in the field, then maybe there's something to that. Maybe I really am not worthy of this experience. Maybe I'm not worthy of learning physics. And so that's really harmful, right? And it's unfortunate. And there are people like that. Obviously, as we know, we experienced it. And it's frustrating to me to hear those things. It's because it's like there's a whole aspect of a person's experience that you have to completely dismiss and ignore to be able to make those kind of like comments about a whole group of people, right? Like, you don't know why are they deficient in those skills, right? And there could be a lot of reasons. It could be like socio-economical reasons, right? It could be like, you know, maybe a lot of other experiences going on that they couldn't focus on physics and learn the details. And, you know, not even stuff that has to be their fault either, right? It's like, by luck, these things happen to you. And so it's frustrating to see that someone has completely dismissed all of these possibilities as to why the person is deficient, and just like completely judging them and saying, oh, because they're deficient in these skills, then they're not worthy to be here, you know, to study physics in the university. And that's just not how I'd like to look at people, right? I mean,
yeah.
I just don't think you need to be making those judgments. Like you said, we're here, we were accepted, and the university knowingly accepted us, knowing that we had some deficiencies, and so your job is to help fill those deficiencies, not to go on and make these judgments about us and then say that we shouldn't even be here because we have those deficiencies. Doesn't make sense, right? So it makes me seem that maybe Elle wasn't even aware as to what the purpose of the bridge program is in general, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And so I think it's kind of, I mean, just the fact that, you know, people want to impose these hierarchies into the system in the first place just seems like pointless. It just seems like, it seems harmful, right? To create this like judgment system of like, okay, this person's better than this person because, you know, they know this, or this person's better. Like, I don't know why there's this like elitism, right, that's baked into the system. And I mean, not saying that L represents the whole system, but I'm just saying this is, you know, I've seen more and more evidence of, you know, these types of behavior, this type of thinking as I've gone on throughout graduate school.
Yeah.
Right?
I mean, even the fact that there's so many hoops, right, that you have to jump through to continue, right? There's that's saying that at some point, if you can't jump through this hoop in this very particular specific way, then you're not good enough to learn physics. They kick you out. They're essentially just cutting you off of learning physics, right? That's what they do. So I'm like, and it's frustrating because it is a pretty narrow path you have to follow. And like, people have to be of a specific privilege to be able to even get to that point. And it's nice that there's programs like the Bridge program, which is trying to diversify physics, you know, And I think it's really essential, and I think it's a great first step, but it needs to continue in terms of like opening up the opportunity to a larger range of people with different life circumstances and experiences. But the small narrow hoops that, there's only specific ways you can get through the system, and it does not work well for some people at all. And I've had a lot of problems, like even trying to go through the system the way that it is, because of the way that my mind works, or the way that I work. It's not always fits well into the trajectory, the way that I'm supposed to follow it. Thankfully, like, it's been working out, and I've been finding ways, but I still feel like I still have these imposter syndrome, because I still feel like I'm not good enough, because I feel like I'm not following the trajectory the way I'm supposed to follow it, and that causes me a lot of like self-confidence issues. And I think that needs to change. I mean, I hope that in the future that's going to change, that it's going to be more open in how you can receive that education, because I think that you're missing out on a lot of talent when you only let a small subset of styles really succeed, right?
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I don't want to go down like this tangent, but I just do want to bring up like about how people's like upbringing and preparation can like affect where you are in terms of like your preparation and stuff like that. There's Veritasium's video on luck, right? Like, for instance, the example he gave that was pretty illuminating was like professional hockey players, right? Like a majority of them happen to have their birthday in the first quarter of the month.
Oh yeah, right.
And the reason that is because when you first go into hockey, like the signups are at the end of the year, right? So you have like an extra 6 months of growth as a child. That 6 months sets you out as like a key player, as a child.
That's crazy.
And then because you were highlighted as like a good player when you're younger, that compounds, right? And then you stay in hockey and you continue to develop on that foundation, right? So it's just like an example of how like pretty arbitrary things tie into your luck as a human being, and, and ties into like how these things that you might not think are related to like where you are in your trajectory as a physicist or as whatever, really plays an important role in terms of like your preparation and stuff like that. So people come in from all different walks of life and like take different paths to get into physics, and so really what I think is a laudable goal to strive for as like a physics community is to just treat people with respect, like acknowledge their background and where they come from and how it might be different than other people, and like don't treat them as less than you just because this like abstract knowledge in this one tiny field of the universe, right?
Yeah.
And somehow you think that makes you better, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah, so that just makes me think that like L has their own insecurities that they're just trying to deal with and kind of end up imposing on people like me.
Mm-hmm. Which we don't know, because we don't know the secrets
speculation
of, L's inner world. But yeah, I mean, definitely. But yeah, just we'll add the link to the Veritasium video in the description of the podcast. So if you guys want to watch that, please go and watch it. It's very interesting.
Mm-hmm. But
yeah. So it's good. So we kind of really, I think, picked apart the details as to what was this kind of like this fundamental thing that really caused, right, these experiences that you've been having. And then, so maybe now you can share a little bit about the positive things. Like, so what did you learn in therapy? Like, did you learn techniques to deal with these feelings, and how did they end up working?
Yeah, so I mean, there's Well, I mean, there's one main technique that I applied and adopted into my practice, and it's called naming the story, right? So like, I don't know if that's like an official name or anything. That's just the name I gave it. But like in my day-to-day life, I already have a practice of mindfulness, right? I already practice being able to identify any emotions I'm feeling and being able to name it, and then figuring out why do I feel that way. So naming emotions, I was already pretty proficient at. And so then the thing I learned in therapy is about naming the story, right? So like, as I mentioned, I found I had a habit of thinking, a pattern of thinking that would kind of be like repetitious. I'd find myself stuck in this loop of thought of just like, oh, I'm not good enough, I'm not smart enough, I don't deserve to be here, so on. And so what my therapist taught me is basically just coming up with a name for that story that you tell yourself, right? And just being like, okay, here's Joe's I'm not good enough story coming up again, right? And what that does is it helps you like detach from your story and realize that it's not necessarily reality, it's just a story that your brain is coming up with, right? It's not based in like objective, whatever you want to call it, objective reality. It's just this story that your brain is generating. And then once I started practicing this, I noticed that my brain was coming up with stories all the time, right? That, probably most of what you're doing is stories, right?
Yeah, that makes sense.
And so it turned out to be a pretty powerful technique. Just like being able to name your emotions was really powerful for me and changed my life profoundly. This technique, I also found to be really powerful. And so was probably one key way that I was able to, make progress and eventually make a breakthrough.
That's great. So could you give an example, I guess, like a more concrete example of like, okay, like when you first practiced this, let's say, so you heard about this, you talked about it with your therapist, and then the first time that something came up where you felt like you needed to use a technique, what was it? And then what did you tell yourself in your mind? And then what happened? And then how did you feel after using that?
Yeah, so it's pretty effective like right away. What I found is I got assigned a high energy homework.
Okay.
I noticed the feelings of imposter syndrome cropping up. I'm just going to use imposter syndrome as like the blanket term for that whole thing. And then I told myself, oh, here comes the I'm not good enough story. And then once that thought triggered in my head, I'm like, okay, wait, step back. I don't want to go down this like thought of like this circular thought process, right? Because I know that's just it's just gonna suck up time, right? And I don't want to just devote hours to that and then basically wake up from that haze.
Yeah. And
then just be that 2 hours down the hole and start back where I am at that moment, right? So at that point I'm like, okay, I'm noticing the story coming up. Let's take note of that. Let's take note of what I'm feeling and what might be the cause of that.
Okay, so first you take note of the feelings that you have. You put a name to the feelings.
Yeah, but like I said, the technique is naming the story. Which is a subtle difference than naming just the feeling.
Yeah, I just wondered if the first part is like identifying the feeling and then you go to name the story.
Sure, yeah, I guess if you get more granular about it, yeah, maybe.
Yeah, because I mean, I know even you've said you've had mindfulness practice in terms of identifying the feelings. You feel more competent maybe with the feeling. It just comes naturally. Mm-hmm. But maybe some other people who haven't done that as often, maybe it's good to make the distinction, like the feeling comes.
Yeah, technically, I think it's probably always true, I guess, that feelings probably come before the thoughts, right?
Yeah.
But I'm not sure about that, but yeah, I think it's probably correct.
So, okay. Yeah. So keep going. Sorry, I didn't want to interrupt, but
I forget what I was talking about.
So we're talking about the trajectory. So the first thing is you have the feeling,
mm-hmm.
And then you identify that you have this feeling, and then you get to naming the story, right?
Yeah, and then I name the stories coming up, and then what I do is I take note of here's the story coming up, here's what I'm feeling, here's a guess as to why it might be, and then I set that aside.
Okay, so in this instant, though, if you say, okay, what did you tell yourself? You named the story, and what did you say why? And what did you write as
I already said, right? So it's like, here's the I'm not good enough, or here's the I'm not good enough story coming up. And then I said, okay, that's interesting. I think it might be because of this, but let's set that aside for now. Let's like take note of that mentally.
Okay.
And set that story aside for a moment. And let's actually try to figure out what's going on with this homework.
Okay.
And then I did. And then I tried to figure out the homework, and I did.
Did you find that more of those feelings kept creeping up as you kept trying, or like once you put it, like is it like you wrangled up all the feelings and the story, and you stuffed it into the story, and you just push the box aside?
Mostly it was compartmentalized, right? So like I was able to wrangle up the feelings, put them to the side. It's like in a toy chest in my mind. The toy chest is kind of overflowing a little bit. Like some of the feelings do, like
they're kind of creeping out,
like leak through just a little bit. So it's like a thought in the back of my mind, but it's not loud enough to distract me from like what I want to do.
That sounds really good. That sounds great.
Yeah, like I said, it's powerful. If you don't have that practice, you should check it out.
Yeah, I think that's a really good idea. Yeah. So it wasn't hard for you to just start doing that and not let the box explode or something and come out gushing all over you?
Surprisingly, no. Yeah, I would have thought it might have been hard. But like I said, because my guess is because I already had a mindfulness practice.
Yeah.
Because when we reevaluated that back in the next session or whatever, I told my therapist about it, and it was only then that I realized, like, oh yeah, I really just like implemented the practice like right away. It was like instinctual almost.
I see. So maybe you had more experience with it from the past, so maybe it was easier.
Yeah.
Or maybe it really can be something like that, like a switch that you just, once you understand, oh, I can just put it aside and I don't have to let it affect me, then you can just go on about your business.
Yeah.
Right? Without it affecting you. Yeah, that's interesting, definitely. So what else? Were there any other techniques that you learned from these sessions?
Not really. Not that I could come up with on the top of my head. I mean, I think there were other techniques, but none that really struck me as like, oh, this is going to help me out, like this is going to be what sets me free.
I just wondered, like, because sometimes I think like this kind of method and stuff is good, right? I just worried that, if you don't understand, I know you said you didn't focus on understanding like what are the main causes here, the root causes. But in a way, I think it is important to know a little bit about what's going on, because if you don't, then I feel like you're just pushing off these emotions into a box and compartmentalizing it, and is it fine like that? Let it just sit in that box forever? Or is it going to affect other portions of your life if you don't really understand at least a little bit about where they come from, and whether, I think maybe what I'm trying to get at is the reasons as to why, or I can't even kind of like get the right words out right now, but talking about a little bit of value systems, like the thing that, like specifically for the situation with Elle, it seemed like they were looking at the world in a way that didn't match up with the way that you look at the world in terms of like the values that maybe Elle has versus the values that you have. And then realizing that maybe those values didn't match up, then maybe that what Elle said lost power. Do you know what I mean? Is that something that you think helped at all, understanding that maybe this thing doesn't follow your value system, so maybe it had less importance in the effect that it would have for you? Or do you think that's not anything that goes into it and it's just completely separate than this and unnecessary for this technique?
Personally, I found that, I had thought about L's value system. Like, I had tried to speculate what their worldview is and why they might have that and where it came from and stuff like that, and how that conflicted with mine, and how does that compare with like my moral beliefs, and like why I think mine are perhaps more justified or more ethical or whatever. I found that brought me like little to no comfort, though, at the end of the day.
Okay.
Found it didn't really help me get out of my funk.
Okay.
So that's just personal. I mean, I don't know, like maybe understanding that and like being able to like logically compare the value systems and figure out like why yours is perhaps more beneficial for people and for you.
Yeah, I mean, just for me, because for me personally, that kind of stuff does help me. Because when I realize, oh, they have a different value system than me, and that's why they're making these assessments of people. And even though I don't agree with what they're doing, then I can kind of empathize in a way and saying I can understand that from their value system, that's why they see the world this way. I think it's harmful. I think it hurts people, and it has hurt me. But, it makes me feel a little bit like, because I can empathize with them, I feel it doesn't harm me as much, because I just say, I live in my value system here. They have a different one. I don't have to let the words that they are putting on me affect me as much. Even though it's still hurtful, right, when I hear that. But understanding that they just have a different value system than me helps me in some way. I don't know why. It just makes me feel like I don't have to believe those words, right? Because I don't connect with that value system. So to me, it's helpful. But I think that this naming the story thing is just helpful universally, or I think that it can be very potent for anyone, that technique. But that's just from my own experience. But so anyway, so then what happened after that? So you started using techniques and you saw that they were really helping you, and so then like what was the effect overall then?
Well,
that was this spring semester 2021, correct?
Yep. Okay. I don't know. I mean, I could talk about my breakthrough.
Yeah, please do.
But so basically after I realized that, like, I think it probably is, my experience with L that kind of set my imposter syndrome on its current course. And once I realized that was the case, then the breakthrough I had was, how do I phrase it? I mean, it's kind of difficult because it's mainly a feeling, right? It's mainly like things I knew that should be true, but I just couldn't like feel like it was true. You know what I mean? It's like a really subjective kind of thing. But it was, the short of it is just basically being able to like truly accept myself for where I'm at in my journey, right? Like L, I guess you could say, like, was in a way was living rent free in my head. Is what I've said lately is basically like every time that I would fuck up or every time that I would get this homework and I would think like, oh, I'm not going to be able to complete this and figure this out, and I'm going to fail this homework, and I'm going to fail at school, and I'm going to flunk out, whatever. Every time something like that happened, it was just like, I'm proving L right again. Here we go. I'm just, I'm just proving that that's true. And so the accepting myself comes into the picture basically when I feel like those feelings will come up, instead of saying like, oh, this means that like I'm a failure or whatever. Like, what I take it is I just say like, oh, okay, like I'm not where I want to be in terms of like my skills as a scientist, right? Like I could see the places where I'm deficient, right? I could see my, like, where I feel insecure. But the difference is now that I just say, like, okay, I'm not where I want to be, so be it. That's fine. I'm at where I'm at. I can't change that at this very second, but what I can do is take the first steps to, like, getting me where I want to go in terms of who I want to be as a scientist, right? So then, rather than, like, trying to prove myself to, like, all these people in power externally to me, I just accept myself for where I'm at, and I'm just trying to prove who I am to myself, really. Like, I'm just trying to, like, become the best version of myself that I can be, right? And at the end of the day, I think that's what I care about most now, is, like, who I see myself as, really, rather than what anyone else, how they evaluate me, how they judge me.
Yeah.
You know, so it felt really profound at the time. It felt, like, really powerful. It felt like I figured it out, you know?
Mm-hmm.
So it was really powerful at the moment, and I was, like, super motivated towards the end of the semester, and I felt like on a good path to, like, you know, I worked through a lot of the issues that were holding me back in terms of progressing in the program.
Yeah, you were beasting it. And you are still.
Yeah, so I mean, it was good. I'm still kind of riding the tail end of that high, but, you know, I'm not feeling as hot as or as euphoric as I was then. You know, which is difficult, right? It's like I worry that, like, you know, was it really that profound? Did I really make a breakthrough, or is this something that's just going to come back, you know, in, like, a couple months? And like I said at the start, like, I have to, you know, I have some tough things coming up in the fall, right? And so it's going to be challenging, and it's going to be hard not to fall back into those thought patterns. But, you know, currently I'm feeling, you know, okay.
I mean, I don't think that you can just erase, you know, all these realizations that you had, and realizations in feeling. I don't know exactly how you would call that, but I know what you're saying. It's like logically, and maybe it makes sense to you, but it's like this, it's like in feeling it now finally connects, right? And it feels, that's when you feel that euphoria, is because you made that connection. And I think it's only natural that, you know, you can't stay euphoric for your whole entire life, right? So it's going to decay down, but you're not going to lose that realization. It's still there. So, yeah, like we said before, maybe we're talking about the roller coaster up and down. There's probably going to be some down again. But you now have those, just the strong techniques that you shared with us, and this realization coupled together, you've made it to another level where I don't think you're going to revert down back to the lower one. It's just, you know, you might have some difficulties, but I'm pretty confident you're going to be able to pass through those as well. So, I don't know. What do you think?
I don't know. I hope so.
I mean, just that, you know, naming the story technique is great. I think that, you know, you can use it all the time. And I think even at the worst, that will carry you along, right?
Yeah. I guess I'm just saying, like, I don't feel, like, necessarily as confident that, like, whatever comes up, I'm going to be able to, like, succeed in physics graduate school specifically. I think, you know, there could be some obstacle that comes up that maybe I can't overcome in a timely manner that they expect. I think that's a possibility.
I mean, I too also have that feeling like, oh, there could be an obstacle that I may not be able to overcome.
Yeah.
Right. And I'm still going to keep trucking and see what happens.
Yeah.
I mean, all I know is that they can't stop me from doing physics if I want to do physics. So, like, I feel like they're going to try. They could try. And I'm going to keep pushing as hard until I get what I want to do. And if they kick me out of the program because I'm not performing at a timely manner, because, you know, I have an issue with going slow. I feel like I'm just slow at things. Then, I mean, I'll find something else to do that I enjoy just as much, right?
Mhm.
So at least that carries me forward.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's hard though. And I wish, the system wasn't exactly the way that it is right now, that people can't really feel a sense of security and safety in a lot of the programs that they're in, right, in the institutions. I think that that's vital. I think everyone has the right to feel that in their environment.
Yeah.
Well, some people might argue and say it's not a right that you can feel safe and security, but
Yeah.
I think it should be, but but I know that's not generally the case, right?
Yeah. Well, I mean, for that specific point, I think there's like a subtlety that might be important. Like it's not common, but like one reason I sought out physics is because I was bad at it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Is because it was difficult, and that's the exact reason why it drew me in, right? Is because like oh, this is something that like I see there's a lot of potential for growth, right, in me. Is if I become proficient in physics, I am going to like shore up a lot of these I don't know if I want to call them weaknesses, but just like shore up a lot of these things within myself that I would like to get better at, that's all. And so it's like, I knew it wasn't going to be comfortable, right? But I think the feeling of security is a little different than like comfortability,
Yeah.
Right? It's like feeling safe to be able, like, you could be uncomfortable but still feel safe, right? Like,
Yeah.
like you're not going to get kicked out or whatever. Like that, constantly having that threat of being just like, tossed out on the street or whatever.
Yes.
Breeds that feeling of insecurity, right? Of instability, that, can be separate from comfortability.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I agree with that, definitely. I mean, I think being uncomfortable is not bad. I mean, you learn from being uncomfortable, right? So it can help you in the growth process, and it's a difficult subject, so you're not gonna feel comfortable. You're literally trying to make progress in a field in a direction that hasn't been made yet, right? So it's like it's a complete unknown where you're going, right? So you're gonna be uncomfortable. You don't know where you're going sometimes. But like you said, I really feel like the security should be there. Just because you make mistakes or you're exploring something and you don't know where you're going, or you shouldn't feel afraid that because you made that mistake that you're gonna get kicked to the curb.
Yeah.
So I think, yeah, I mean, I think that kind of leads into even a larger conversation that I was hoping that we could have one day here on the podcast too. Maybe about what we see in the, maybe in our department and in the culture in general, like what kind of needs aren't being met, right, for graduate students, and maybe, other maybe if you want to talk about undergraduates, graduate students, like even postdocs, right? The people in the community, like what needs aren't being met to the people in the community, in the physics community, right? And we all know about the work balance being out of balance, essentially. You hear it all the time. People in graduate school, they're like, don't have that much time for a social life or even taking care of the health. Like you mentioned earlier, you weren't sleeping, you weren't taking care of your body because you were so afraid, because you didn't have this need met of security and safety. You're so afraid you're going to be kicked out, so you have to work harder and harder and harder. It seems like it's an expectation, an inherent expectation, that if you're a graduate student, probably not just in physics and other areas as well, that you need to just work to the bone and just completely disregard the rest of your life for 6 years. Yep. It's just like, that's very harmful. And I don't understand why as a culture we've even gotten to that point where people don't even acknowledge your needs at all. And so it doesn't seem like there is really a space where you can talk about these needs that aren't being met. And I think that is unacceptable.
Yeah.
We need to be able to communicate to the people in power the needs that we have, and we need to be respected, because the whole hierarchy is messed up. Those people aren't more important than us. Like, we both have needs. Their needs should be met, and our needs should be met. And I know there's a whole power hierarchy in the higher power structure as well, that a lot of them aren't getting needs met from their own colleagues, and that's not acceptable either. But we know the graduate student side of it, because we're graduate students. That's what we can speak towards more. But that all has to be restructured. Like, the power structure situation is just harmful on all levels, right? For the faculty and for the graduate students and for the undergrads and for the postdocs.
Yeah.
And that's something that I would like to definitely explore in the future and talk about, because I don't think it's talked about a lot, and see, what are some strategies or some solutions, that maybe we can think about. Yeah, so, some strategies or solutions that maybe we're trying to implement, in our university, or that other universities have been thinking about. But I think it would be a good conversation for the future. I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, I think it would be great to talk about that. Yeah, I think the state of physics is that it's been normalized to basically have physics be all of your life, right? I think some professors have managed to have families, right?
Sometimes I wonder how,
but yeah, exactly. Even that seems like a stretch of like what is culturally appropriate within the community, right? And that's just bizarre, right? That's just, I think it's taking it to a level way too far. And, it would be fun to speculate as to, why that is and what we could do about it.
Yeah, definitely.
So, what do you think? Does that wrap up the update, or is there other things to talk about? I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's good. I think that we've done a good, thorough job. I think that maybe in the next one we can explore it a little bit more on these ideas that we're talking about in terms of the needs, the power structures, and physics. And then, I'll issue you a challenge, but for the next time.
For the next time, okay. Cool. And then maybe that ties in with like some more details of like what's been going on with you.
Yeah, maybe I'll share a little bit more tidbits if you guys want to know a little bit more about Irene. I'll share a little bit more on my journey and my experiences. I'm a little bit more reserved sometimes when it comes to sharing that inner world, but I do like to share it, and I think that you guys deserve to hear it if you've been listening to us so far. And I'd love to share it so you guys know a little bit more about me. And, my emotional experiences as well in grad school.
Yeah, great. So y'all can look forward to that, and hopefully more content coming on the way shortly. If you've been listening this far, thank you so much. We really appreciate it. And if I haven't said it already, go ahead and check us out on Facebook and your whatever listening platform you're on. Go ahead and subscribe to us, follow us. You know the deal. Also, we're totally doing this out of the love of our hearts, I guess, like doing this totally free. So if you want to support us, check us out on Patreon. Anything else you want to shout out?
Yeah, I mean, so, if anyone, feel free to email us, right? We have an email here and we'd love to hear from you. Any questions or topics you want us to cover. We would really love to do that for you. And yeah, I mean, we'll be posting some links here in the description. Like we said, we'll post that Veritasium luck video. And also we'll post the feelings inventory as well as the needs inventory, which is just something that can help you identify, your feelings, give them specific word to identify your feelings. Sometimes it's hard to know more feelings than just happy, sad, angry. This is more descriptive. So if you're interested in exploring these different, words essentially, you can look at that. And also the needs-based inventory, or the needs inventory, so that you can see the different types of needs. So you can identify whether you feel like these needs are being met or not. So just a little fun if you guys want to do a little bit more reading. It's not that much reading. It's just words on a page. I think it's really interesting though, So yeah, that's all I wanted to say. I had on there. I'm really happy to be continuing this podcast, and I hope you guys keep listening to us. Even I feel a little awkward sometimes, but I'm happy to be vulnerable with you guys. So thank you for listening and all of your attention, as always.
All right. Yeah, thanks for listening, everyone, and we'll catch you on the next one.